Hello everybody, this is Argent with a reaction review of Fantastical NEETs and where to hire them. So hopefully the audio quality is a bit better. I found out today that I was using the mic wrong. The recording device is apparently in the side of the mic, not at the top. So I had my Blue Yeti pointed directly at myself, so that was giving the titty sound. I also had the mic backwards. We're going to move on positively, and we're going to talk about Fantastic NEETs and where to find them. I just saw this movie. I really didn't want to see this movie. However, my friend Abstract really wanted to see it for some reason. So I agreed to go just because I like popcorn and I like movies and I like hanging out with my best bud. So I figured, why not? It's not like I have anything else to do Friday night other than maybe go on a podcast. But anyways, so Fantastical NEETs and Where to Find Them is a strange movie. I'm trying to think of... the biggest problem with it is it's extremely tonally awkward. It's incoherent. There's something Abstract and I came up with years ago after we watched Hancock. For those of you who haven't seen Hancock, Hancock is a movie that has two very different parts in it. The first half is kind of like a lighthearted comedy, and the second half becomes a extremely dark movie that looks like it's from a different genre. And this is very similar to that. This film is a couple different movies kind of crammed together, none of them done super well. And I think the frustrating thing is there's movies that are just bad and always will be bad. And then there's movies that had a lot of potential to be good and they just screwed up. And I think this was one. I think David Yates, someone needed to say no to him. Someone had to kind of do what they did to George Lucas or Michael Bay and just rein him in. Here we have a movie that can't decide if it's trying to be dark and like really dark. It can't decide if it's trying to be like childish and whimsical. It can't decide if it's trying to be a kid's movie, an adult's movie, a political commentary movie. It's kind of all these different concepts thrown in together. And it's kind of different because in Harry Potter, you had a book series that was made to appeal to all ages and kind of contained all these elements. With Fantastical NEETs and Where to Hire Them, it's a bit different. All these different elements were kind of inherent parts of it. It was written as kind of a single narrative that encompassed a bunch of things. In this case, you have all these different things that are kind of thrown together. And so this movie has sudden and jarring, like, tonal shifts. Now, I was basically dead set on hating this movie. I get tired of the milking series to death. This movie apparently is going to not only be a trilogy, but is going to be 5 movies. And I mean, I think when I left the theater, I was like, this film was okay. But did it add anything to Harry Potter? Not really. Did it add anything to the field of motion pictures? Not really. Was it a popcorn movie? I guess, but I just expect something a bit more. This film had a massive budget. And I can see where they spent the money, but you think they could have hired a better writer. J.K. Rowling has long since lost her talents and just become a hack. I still think Deathly Hallows, the book, was shit. I still think Half-Blood Prince was shit. I think she lost all her talent after Order of the Phoenix. And the series just went into a terminal death spiral that it's never recovered from. So let's try to get into this and really break it down. So the protagonist of Fantastical NEETs and Where to Hire Them is Newt Scamander, who's a professional NEET. He doesn't have any obvious field of employment. Instead, he travels the world. Basically, he finds endangered magical species and saves them and tries to breed them and then reintroduce them into the wild. He mentions that he served in World War I on the Eastern Front in a dragon battalion, and his older brother is mentioned to have been a war hero. So, yeah, so Newt Scamander is an autist. And I don't just say this, like, ironically. I mean, he's actually autistic. He can't look at people in the face. His body language is always really weird. He has trouble interacting with people. He has extremely specific interests that he's obsessive about. He has kind of a disregard for the safety of others. And it just kind of has a monomania. So he travels the world saving fantastical creatures. And kind of his big thing is he has a case, like a suitcase. And contained within it is this huge series of biomes. If you've ever been to like the Biodome in Montreal, it's kind of like that. There's like a desert portion, a forest portion, an ice portion. You have all these different areas of the of his suitcase, and he has all kinds of endangered magical species within it. And his kind of thing is a magical conservationist. So I guess he is kind of doing something, so I don't know if you can really call him a NEET. I just like calling him a NEET because it's funny, and he's also autistic. And I mean that, once again, unironically, he actually is if you watch the movie. So, whatchamacallit? Okay, so let's just go through this. So, Newt Scamander shows up in New York. The funny thing about his case is his case has a broken lock on it, so it constantly opens and creatures keep escaping. Now, a lot of these creatures are dangerous and eat people or destroy buildings or do all kinds of other exceedingly dangerous stuff. But he always reacts with mild concern. Like, there's one point in the movie where, I don't know, this weird frog thing with giant teeth gets out that has a poisonous bite, and the guy probably could have died from it. But he's just like, oh, they're not dangerous. None of my creatures are dangerous. Not the giant dragon, not the giant winged snake that eats people. None of them are dangerous at all. So basically, a lot of the movie is just his creatures breaking out. There's this Jewish animal he has. It looks kind of like a kiwi, I guess, kiwi bird. I forget what it's called. It's some animal, and basically it just runs around stealing jewels and money and making a hoard that it likes to sleep on. So at the beginning of the movie, it breaks into a bank, and he goes into the bank, and dozens of muggles see him use magic, and he pulls in a Polish guy named Jacob Kowalski, who is a nomad, which in America is what the term they use for muggles. So he's trying to get a loan to start a bakery. He's a World War I veteran who works at a canning factory. And you might think, okay, this is a chance. We're going to have a muggle. He apparently not only served in the war, but he also served after the war in the occupation forces. So you're like, maybe this guy's going to be really tough. Maybe we're going to have like a muggle actually do something in Harry Potter and kind of have a character who can like use his skills or maybe kind of physicality in a way that is gonna kind of just be an interesting twist. But he's kind of a fat, goofy guy. So he's kind of pointless, but he just tags along throughout the movie. And he's the guy, the actor who plays him just chews scenery and just overacts. So basically, after retrieving the Niffler, which is the Jewish bird, Newt is going to obliviate the nomad, but he's interrupted by Tina Goldstein, who arrests Newt for basically being a autist because he had magical creatures running around in front of muggles. He petrified the president of the bank without obliviating him, and he basically broke magical security. So when whatchamacallit, Tina arrests him. She takes him in, and we're treated to one of Rowling's self-righteous conversations. She's like, "Do you know anything about how magic works? The Ministry of Magic, or whatever, the magical government works in America?" And he's like, "Yes, you have outdated rules about Muggles and normal and wizards marrying." I'm like, "Oh yeah, give it to the old world cuck to attack based America." It turns out America's not so based. Despite this being an era with segregation, somehow there's a black president of the Magic States of America. Not just a black president, but a Dindes. So they have a Dindes leading them who's incompetent and corrupt. Big surprise. And no one really seems bothered by this. It's kind of funny because you actually can't really show racism or religious bigotry anymore in movies. Because I think it triggers people too much. So if you have like people who are neo-Nazis or whatever, they can't talk about blacks and Jews anymore, so they're just kind of generic evil. Because even like showing it is just bad. This could be just because our enemies are just pussies and they can't stand to hear racism, even if it's the villain talking about it. It could also be, though, that after movies, like American History X, people just kind of come to the conclusion that they can't really parody our views. So instead, like they're bad at kind of explaining. Like they can't explain them because they don't understand them. It's just something that their minds can't really comprehend because they kind of are just completely unused to dealing with or trying to understand ideas that aren't their own. So they stop making the villains have motivations because they realized it was being too effective. So anyway, so Newt gets arrested and we're introduced to the head of magical enforcement in America, Colin Farrell. So Colin Farrell, there's just kind of a bunch of bullshit happening. It turns out that in the American ministry, there's a massive rise of anti-wizarding witch sentiment. Apparently the public is more aware of wizards and witches in America, and there's a group called the New Salem Society, which is preaching anti-wizarding and witching. They're attempting to expose wizards and witches, and they're trying to lead a public crusade against them. And throughout the city, there's been like a long stream of destruction from an unknown force. So this is kind of the backdrop we have in Fantastical Beasts. So the Polish guy, who will hence be known as Michael Enoch, because he's like a big guy from New York who's kind of a Euromut. So Mike Enoch opens up his case that had the pastries he was showing to the bank in them, because he was trying to get a loan to start a bakery because he's tired of being a work at a canning plant. So a beast comes out of it and bites him, and it turns out that it's probably a fatal reaction. But Newt shows up and manages to give him, in a disinterested fashion, the antidote in time. Newt and Jacob both are taken back by Tina, who it turns out that Tina is a demoted Auror who's despised by the wizarding community. So we meet her and her, the other Jewess in the movie. What's her name again? Queenie Goldstein. If that's not a Jewish name, I've never heard of one. So she's kind of a thought, but for whatever reason, she likes Michael Enoch. She can probably sense his Aryan genes and wants to, I don't know, make them Jewish. So, So they start flirting, and it's just really awkward. I'm sorry if I'm not really describing the awkwardness of this well. I kind of have to go scene by scene. I think if you watch the movie, you'd really be able to see it better. But there's like this comedic dinner table scene where like they use magic to cook, and there's just all like these over the top facial expressions. Jacob's just like, I've never seen anything this amazing before. Magic is all of this. It's so cool. It's the it's just yeah. I don't really know what to say about the whole thing. It's weird, and then we have another whimsical scene where Jacob goes into Newt's trunk, and they take care of Beast together, and we just get to show off all the CG. And it's so wonderful and whimsical. So then we cut back to this swooping evil, which is like this massive dark presence that's destroying buildings, it's killing people, etc., etc., and the New Salem Society is trying to kind of preach against it and talk about his whatchamacallit, completely lost my train of thought there. So it cuts to like all this death and destruction, and then we later have the subplot, the main like subplot in the movie. So there's this retarded kid. Sorry, that's politically incorrect. Mentally handicapped kid who is an orphan that was adopted by Mary Lou, who's the leader of the New Salem Society. So she's adopted dozens of children that she uses as slave labor to distribute her pamphlets, and she feeds them gruel. Most notably is Modesty and Credence, who are brothers and sisters that were both adopted, and it's strongly implied that their parents were witches, or that her mother was a witch, and they died and she took them in. But she frequently beats them to try to get the magic out of them. Colin Farrell's character, who's the head of wizarding magic in Britain, frequently shows up and offers things to Credence, including revenge, being allowed to join the wizarding world, being taught magic, and there's even kind of sexual overtones to their relationship. But only if Credence can fulfill a prophecy and find this special child who's born with immense power. We then find out about something called an Obscura. Apparently, children who are forced to repress their magic, it builds up in them over the years, and it's released with a colossal display of power that eventually kills the user as it burns out their magical core and all the obtained energy. And it turns out that the dark presence that's been destroying the city is a particularly powerful Obscura. We also find out that in his journeys as a NEET, Newt had found out a way to remove Obscuras and allow the children to function normally. I don't know, it doesn't really make sense. So then we go through a montage of our four heroes, Queenie, Mike Enoch, Newt the NEET, and Tina, going on a quirky journey to bring back the rest of the magical beasts. This includes a rhino, I guess, lightning bug hybrid, a demigeese, and a giant snake. And to get information, they go and talk to a goblin mobster played by Ron Perlman, who's pretty much the most Jewish character in any movie. He tries to bargain with them. When he came on stream, Abstract and I just started laughing hysterically. The goblins are just so Jewish, especially in Deathly Hallows Part 2, where Voldemort kills a bunch of them in a fire reminiscent of the Holocaust. So So the Obscurus kills the son, who's a senator of a wealthy newspaper magnate, and probably the Hearsts, I guess. And there's this awkward scene earlier in the movie where his other son tries to tell his father that there's witches and that they're behind all the destruction in the city. But, so the Obscura kills that guy, so then the the Congress is rapidly trying to do something about it. And then they find an Obscura within Newt's bag and determine that he was the one behind it and he was the one who caused the whole thing. So they sentence him and Tina to death because of reasons. And we're taken to the most surreal movie where they use the pensive spell to remove the happy memories from Tina, and they cast them over this like watery metallic substance, and then they put her in an execution chair, and her chair like sinks and the water like moves, and it like is going to start forming a dome and like crush her, but she's like very happy because it's playing back all her favorite movie memories, including one where she lost her position as an auror to try to save Credence earlier in the film. So all that stuff happened, and Newt's able to break out. Meanwhile, Queenie and Jacob are able to retrieve the magical suitcase. So all of Newt's creatures have been returned, but there's still the issue of figuring out who the Obscura is and getting to him before it's too late. So he keeps being visited by Colin Farrell's character, and it just gets more and more desperate. Colin Farrell passes whatchamacallit, I'm trying to remember what his name is. Passes Credence a symbol now, and says, "Tap this when you're ready to call me." Now, the symbol obviously proves what we've all suspected from the beginning, that Colin Farrell's character is obviously Grinwald using an illusion. I figured it out the first time we saw him. There's a lot of reasons why it's obvious, but the symbol he passes him is the symbol for the Deathly Hallows, which is a symbol that Grinwald and Dumbledore both used, along with the motto, "The Greater Good." So Credence finds a wand underneath his sister's bed. Their mother assumes that it's his and prepares to whip him with his belt and snaps it. Modesty confesses the wand is hers. And when Mary Lou tries to smack Credence, the Obscura appears again and kills her. Credence leads the guy who's obviously Gellert Grinwald to where his sister's hiding, and Gellert Grinwald tells Credence to fuck off and that he's a squib and that he can't help someone with no ability to perform magic. Unfortunately, what winds up happening is that the Obscura this whole time was Credence, as we were all pretty sure about. The reason why they didn't think it was Credence is normally magical beings who have to suppress their power die around the age of 8. Credence is like 16. So he's so powerful he was able to stay alive for that long. So he's implied to be one of the most powerful characters in the Harry Potter verse. And he just completely snaps, having killed his mother, having had the only person who he thought could get him out of the bad thing in his life, Grinwald, betray him. So he just goes on a mass murdering rampage and just destroys large portions of the city. Eventually he's forced to go underground, and Newt's briefly able to talk him off the cliff. The wizards set up a huge dome, and the Congress shows up prepared to confront Credence and Newt. So Credence and Newt are talking. However, Grinwald shows up and begins beating the living crap out of Newt. He tries to convince Credence to join him, talking about how great they can be together and how he won't have to live in the shadows anymore as his right-hand man. As this happens and they're talking and there's a battle scene going on, the rest of the Congress shows up and they fire countless volleys of spells into Credence, who eventually explodes despite his immense power under the weight of so many spells. Grinwald, shaking off his disguise, goes completely insane and starts ranting about how laws are in place to protect muggles but not to protect wizards, and that ultimately what Grinwald's ideology is that to a certain extent he believed in blood purity, but that wasn't really his thing. He believed that muggles were children and that wizards had a right to rule because they had a superior knowledge about how the world works and were superior power. In other words, he viewed them as natural aristocrats, and he wanted to create a European-wide magical empire under his own rule that would be an enlightened state ruled by the principle of the greater good. And he had come to America to try and introduce his ideas there. So he declares that this has been a good thing, as there's no way to obliviate an entire city, and that this will lead to them finally being able to begin their war against the Muggles. However, obviously all the Congress wizards turn against him, and it starts out with him just blowing through them. Despite there being dozens of them, he merely shields and just keeps shooting and shooting and shooting. As he's going through them, Newt pulls out one of his creatures and knocks Grinwald down. They're able to chain him up, and using a Revealo spell shows that he's actually Grinwald. Grinwald is a blonde-haired, blue-eyed super Aryan man, as are all the villains in Harry Potter, to be perfectly honest. With the exception of Voldemort, of course, because he's dark hair, blue eyes, like Hitler. So they're taken away. In a really dark scene, they obliviate Jacob, and after Queenie basically declares her love for him. However, Newt gives Jacob a whole big box of okami shells, which are made out of silver, and he's able to open his bakery, which is wildly successful, and he becomes prosperous and makes a lot of people happy. However, Queenie, who's in love with him, comes to the store, and he places his hand where his neck wound was, implying that he remembers her, and presumably that they'll continue their relationship. Tina, who's obviously in love with Newt, pretty much begs him not to go, wants him to show some form of emotion towards her, and just wants something. But Newt uses his neat superpower and treats her with indifference. He does mention, though, that he'll bring her a copy of his book in person when it's finished being written, and then goes off without embracing or kissing her, because that's just the way NEETs roll. Nothing makes women more aroused than ignoring them. So we have that, and that kind of brings us to the end of this movie. So the question is, like, what was the point of it, and why should I care? Was it like I said, was it this kind of fun, whimsical movie? I mean, a movie about just Newt going through New York, chasing down magical creatures, almost kind of like wizarding Pokemon. That could be fun. There's nothing wrong with making a whimsical movie. The issue is you have this Dindes as president of the United States, the magical United States, which makes zero sense and is obviously another nod to cultural Marxism. You also have some other weird elements kind of thrown in there. You have vaguely mentioned Grinwald. Like, it's set up at the beginning like he's going to be a major part of the movie. They talk all about it in They talk all about it in the opening scroll. They have all these pictures of Grinwald doing stuff. None of that's explained. His philosophy is very rarely explained, just in little bits. So Grinwald isn't the focus of the movie. The magical creatures kind of are, but we also have this really dark subplot with Credence and his abusive mother, which feels like it's from a completely other movie. It's like something you'd see in Half-Blood Prince, not a film as childish and juvenile as Fantastical Beasts and Where to Find... Fantastical NEETs and Where to Hire Them. Aside from that, it's kind of hard to really get into depth about the film's themes. There aren't really any. It's just kind of an awkward mess of a film. So, I hope you learned a bit about how fantastical NEETs can be and where you can find them if you're trying to hire them. This is Argent, and I'll talk to you guys later.